Hey there, and welcome to Supported It, which is a new type of content that we're going to be trying on the channel, which essentially shows you some of the strangest or more difficult or challenging or just technically obstinate parts that I've had to deal with over my time doing professional 3D printing. And these are either parts that I've had to do because of a customer ordering something or just generally because I work with that artist anyway, and it's just my job to make sure that their stuff comes out good. Anyway, I'm not going to waste too much time talking about it, but all of you know what I mean. You've all come across that part, that thing, that piece, whatever. It's either highly textured, so it has billions of islands, or it just has a weird shape, so it's really hard to orient and just figure out a good way to do it. You're kind of you're either being careful because it's a delicate part, and maybe you have to be really cautious about the style of supports that you're using, and that sort of thing. And so essentially, we're going to cover that kind of stuff. And I'm going to give you some ideas, concepts, and things that you can go over the next time you're given something wild or crazy or is just plain just difficult to support. Let's get into it. Okay, let's jump right into it. And as I said, these are going to be interesting. So, this was a hair accessory for a maid character. Now, it's not hyper delicate, it's actually pretty thick because it's a decent sized part. A pretty large figurine. But what was awkward was how to figure out the best way to orient it. Now, I ended up doing it like this, but when I first got the piece, it was kind of like flopped down like that, and I'm looking at it going, okay. And again, this one doesn't, not the most difficult, but we started with something easy. So what I wanted to do was making it go end to end like that, and then I applied whatever raft I was using. Then we're going to look at, since this is a pretty small part, we're going to look at our lights or our sub mediums. And I'm pretty sure we just started with your, basic island search. Now, when you're looking at smaller stuff, and this isn't necessarily that small because it's on a big figurine, but when you do look at smaller stuff, you want to go light, really hyper light. Otherwise, you're just going to end up breaking it. Now, you guys have seen me do tons of delicate stuff, so this isn't necessarily about delicate. It's more about showing you kind of some of the weird and intricate parts that I've had to do over the years. And I just wanted to share some of that with y'all because I thought it was fun. I mean, this could be anything from something like a textured sock, which is annoying, to a piece of hair, which is equally annoying. Some hair is thinner than others, and then you got weird headdresses and all kinds of stuff. Now, as you see here, what I'm doing for this is just relatively simple, and I'm not going to go through each supporting technique for each piece, but I am going to give you some advice for each piece. And yes, I am using Snap is turned on. I've actually learned to like that a lot. It looks a little crazy from this perspective because you've got all these pin like tips here, but so few on the actual support bars. And if we go here, I can put my small object bracing on, and that'll give me my cross bracings. And that's essentially how you want to handle something like that. Obviously, check all your islands at your different layer heights. Now, some other fun ones we've had are things like this big ribbon, which presents its issues just because of its ripple texture. So you're constantly faced with probably wanting to add more supports along each one of those ripples, which is fine because you don't want them to sag or pancake or anything. And you could do it something like that if you wanted to, and then obviously please don't forget to support the bottom. That's where the print starts. But essentially, it's this upper area because at first I was tempted to actually print it like this. Uh, but then I realized this was actually the inside, and then I said, well, maybe I could do it like this. But I didn't really like this arch here. And so I kind of settled on somewhere in the middle where it's like that. Now, the next one's going to be one that was kind of more of texture terror nightmare, and you'll see what I mean. This rabbit is it's great. I mean, the texture is well done. I guess it's going to make it real easy to paint. Now he's scaled up. Well, actually, he's at 100% scale, but he's meant to be scaled down. The figurine is not. Um, I don't make them that big. I mean, you get the idea. He's a little bit bigger than he's supposed to be. Anyway, that texture. I have actual chills looking at this thing because here I'll just give you an idea. Let's take him over to the prepare tab real quick. Let's do this. Now I apologize if this takes like 2 decades to run. I don't think it will, but I could always speed it up for you. It might. I might have to speed this up. Nah. I'll just let you listen to the soothing sound of my voice as it does this. Um, Essentially, he's just got so much texture going on that regardless of what direction you place him, he's going to wind up with hundreds of islands. And even when I scaled him down a little bit to about 50%, uh, again, like I said, I got literal chills on this one. He's not a. This was not a fun one to do. I did not take much joy and pleasure in supporting this little dude. And as you can see, the island detection is actually taking a really long time because of the level of detail that's actually going on. It's a lot of pixels in there that it has to look at. We'll get there. It's going. Almost there. Come on, Lychee, you can do it. I believe in you. There we go. 156. Oh, I said hundreds. It's only 156. Yeah, and as you can see, they're all in the fur area. Now, when you do my routine of, going down to 20 microns, which I'm not going to torture you with that because it's going to take like 20 minutes, you're going to find more. Probably going to find about maybe another 100 or so. This kind of stuff just, the texture kills me. These ribbon here, again, more ribbons. The only thing that was a little annoying about this was that it was a little bit low poly. Because I guess it was a ribbon. This was also an older one. Um, and the low poly caused a little bit more islands to show up than there would have been if this was smoothed out a little bit. Now, here's an interesting one. This is one of the ones that I love to show because it also lets me show off another tool. Now, this Ribbo, as it's called here, Ribbo 3, is part of the same character from this ribbon, as you can see. It's a little bit lower poly. But if we go here and we see, okay, this is actually being treated as one part. Okay, well, that's a problem. We don't want that. So for stuff like this, whenever you get something like that, you're going to want to go over to your layout tab and you want to click on tools. And there's a tool called split. Go ahead and click that while you have that object selected, and then it will split them. And now they are their own very own little objects. And much easier to support, might add, because you can turn them like this. And you can point these little ribbons up. And they will take up a lot less room this way than they would have traditionally being both connected at the hip. Got a couple more parts to show you. This is a cape. Capes are often awkward because you don't want to support them like this. That's too many little tips coming down there. I really hate that. So I do them like this. But see, then this causes a problem here too because we have a suction cup that's going to occur in the shoulder areas of the cape all the way around. So what I do normally, if I can, is I'll tilt it back a little bit here, and then I'll go look at this neck position. So, like for example, here, I'm not going to hollow it because that's silly. What I am going to do is I am going to punch a hole in it. So we're going to take a cylinder hole, we're going to put it there, and then we'll go to our advanced, and I'm going to make it longer so it can penetrate through the inside of the cape. Now, it's not going to work there because unfortunately it's colliding directly with the key on the inside, so that's not going to work right there. So what I ended up doing on this particular model was I ended up taking it and actually moving it down here below the key itself and then shortening it till it was only coming through the edge, until it was not coming through the edge of the cape there. I believe I adjusted it as close as I could here because I had to overcome this issue. I was like, all right, well, I want to print it upside down, but I don't want a suction cup because I don't want it to warp. So we created this. Yeah, there we go. We created this tiny little suction hole here that when you then punch this free, you're not damaging anything that you can see. It's just damaging that. And it puts this single hole right there next to the back of the key. So when this pulls up, you have a hole there to release some of the pressure. Now, albeit this isn't going to be perfect because I'll show you there still is suction happening in the corners. It's not as bad, though, if I had not put a hole there at all. And I don't want to put holes all the way up here because I don't want to have to correct or replace anything once this is printed. I'd rather just have one little tiny hole back here that I'm not going to care about because my next seam is going to cover that anyway. So that was a very good solution for, at least for my issue there that I wanted to solve. And as you can see, it did go through. There was no problem there. And I suppose you could put more than one hole here if you wanted to. Like I could put like one there and also one there. And again, it's about, making sure they fire through without colliding with too much of the geometry, because then you're going to wind up having tears through the mesh. See, like we could create more holes here, pop those out. And you see we're not causing any damage, nothing that anyone's going to see, but this next seam area, now we've got 3 holes. And that's going to give you much better aeration. And again, if I check the suction cup, it's still going to tell me there is going to be suction because there will be in the corners where I cannot put a hole because it is leaning a little bit to one side. The other thing we could do is we could actually correct the trajectory here a little bit. And then we could also take a look there. This will reduce that suction over in the corner. It's still going to be there a little. Okay, no, actually, look, that gets rid of it. So there you go. You put your 3 little holes and you just remove that lean and boom, parts like this will be fine. Now, if you don't want to go through all that trouble, I suppose you don't have to, and you could print it the other way around. I'm not saying you can't. My suggestion is to do it upside down because you have far less, small areas for the supports to grab onto. Here you can put most of your supports here, and a little bit up on the shoulders, which gives you minimal sanding work on some very smooth parts of the model, which I think is just fine. Now, this same character with the cape also had a couple of other pieces that gave me a little bit of an agita. And not because they were hyper difficult, just trying to figure out the best way to do them, I think, is more or less it. So we had this, and this. And believe you me, I stood there and I stared at these parts for quite a while because I wasn't really sure what the heck was going on. Now, eventually I realized that this was actually an impression of what was it was an inverted impression of what's on the base. And this is so it would kind of fit into place. So I didn't want to lose any of that texture at all. But I didn't like the idea of printing them this way, upside down. I didn't really see much of a choice either way. But I wound up flipping them upside down like this, keeping this texture away from the bottom, and adding supports down here, starting at the tips at the bottom. And they printed great, no problems. Like I said, I had my reservations about doing it this way, but it worked out. It's always a bit weird when you're trying a new technique with something. And with this was definitely something I had not tried to do. These shapes were also kind of weird. They look like big tongues. And it was just a weird kind of orientation thing. So for me, this was one I'll always remember, having to support these weird parts. And no, this is not how I supported them. I'm just showing you where I started with the support tips and then worked my way up. Now, since these were all solid, I had to give them a decent amount of supporting along these yellow areas here, and I simply did that by using the support painter, and I made some relatively short work of these guys in no time. And now with the new Snap to Grid feature, I imagine this job would have actually taken less time. So, hey, now I can look forward to doing something weird like this in the future, perhaps. Because now that feature allows me to use support painter and other stuff like that much more freely and not kind of worry about structure too much until I'm kind of ready to worry about structure. And then when I do, my support structures just look that much more professional. So really do like the grid structure a lot. It's been a very, very nice tool to use. Hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. It's also helped, I think, some of my prints success ratios too on some of the parts that I work on that are much taller. This type of support grid is very good for stabilizing tall and long supports. So it's very handy for that. And we also had the blade and the book. Now the book, when I saw this, it was upside down, pages were facing the bottom, and I said, oh, I don't think I should do it that way. Now, I had thought about doing it kind of like this way, with the key facing down and the back of the book sort of leaning and the pages folded out like this. But I eventually wound up supporting it flat, kind of, well, not flat, but at an angle this way. And then I wound up supporting the back using the support projection system, which I simply just selected the areas I wanted to add the frames to. And then we preview. And this is a small object, so I'm going to go with light. Add the supports. And then we'll add our structure. And you can make short work or something like that. Now, yes, you do definitely want to support the edge of these book pages here, because as you come out to this edge, it's going to need a little bit of support so it doesn't sag. So I would definitely advise adding mini supports here to structure, give this a little bit of structure and help this print nice and smooth. Because remember, that's going to go a little bit kind of at an odd pace, because you're going to see this is going to come up, and then this page is actually going to start. So you're going to want to support that all the way across, just like that. And you can use that inline support tool for that. You can use support painter if you got a nice steady hand. You can do it manually, 1-1, like I'm doing it here. And of course, you can always support it in another orientation so you can avoid this kind of page overlap as well. Don't necessarily need to follow my orientation here to the T. Because if you look at it, you're only going to deal with that one page being an island like that. It's a ledge, overhang, whatever you want to call it. The rest of them are going to actually go upward and away. So it's really just that one section that's going to be a bit of a bother. And once you're past that, you should be pretty good. And of course, don't forget to make sure that you put supports all along the first lip, which is going to be about sure that we actually get a good line here. And that'll give you a nice starting point. And then, like I said, you've got that section there that's going to start up. Now, just because you've got a row of supports here doesn't mean this is all set. My suggestion to you would be to go in here and add some minis in the second row, like right behind this, and give it some stability, because that page is going to sag otherwise. That's what's going to happen. So just make sure that you've got enough there to ensure that it's going to survive that first layer of itself. I mean, not the first layer of the print, but the first layer of that part, which is, you see how big that is? See, and there's even a part there that we need to make sure is covered as well. See? Always do your validation, always check, and especially when you're working on weird parts like something like a book with open pages, always double check what you're doing, make sure orientation's accurate, stuff like that, because the better you're doing that, the better the less time you're going to be spending sanding and reprinting parts that didn't quite come out good or whatever. And like I said, there's multiple ways we could support this book. We could flip it. We could do it the other direction, like I said, and avoid this overhang altogether. You could also do it pages down, and you can do it sideways. If we do it sideways, the interesting thing about that, like if we do it this way, like I had first thought of, you can actually, get away with not having to deal with having to support those pages too much, and you wind up with it like that. But again, I don't know why. For some reason, I first did not choose to do it this way, but looking at it now, it actually would be just as viable as doing it the other way. In fact, it might actually be a more viable way of doing it, because then you don't have to worry about supporting those silly pages the way I was just showing you. And then you could simply just do it across. And then obviously you'd want to, support each section of the book as the page comes out. And that could possibly be it for that part right there, aside from any islands that I missed. And there you go. There's two ways to support that. This one probably a little bit easier than the one I was just showing you. And again, this just goes to show that I think the more you do this, the more you play around with this, the more you're going to go back to parts that you've supported in the past. And you're going to realize, hey, maybe I overdid this one, or maybe I overthought this, or maybe this could be better supported at this angle. And that's a lot of times what we discover kind of when we go over it too. And I'll do the same thing. I'll look at a part when I'm doing a video with you guys, and I look back and I go, man, why didn't I do it this way the first time? It's because the second time, third time, fourth time, you always get some more insight out of what you're doing with that particular part. And I think sometimes it pays to go back and look at old things that you've done and kind of compare notes and see where you could make those improvements. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I'm doing this series. I've supported it because I kind of feel like it's time for me to go back and look at some things that I had worked on. And the last part for this particular episode is this cool looking blade here, which is also part of that same model. And this one was kind of awkward because the bottom was round and it has a hole. So we create suction a little bit at some point, and we're also we have a round bottom. So there's a few things I don't like about round bottoms. You have this curve to work with, and the first couple layers are always going to be soft. And when working on a curve, sometimes you wind up with less than desirable looking results. But always make sure to support where the curve starts really, really well. Use light supports and cluster them in as tightly as you can, but make sure that you're focusing on the shape. Whereas here, as you can see, I'm focusing on the actual outline of the shape of the bottom here, and I'm trying to cradle it, but I'm applying as many of these light tips as possible. And trust me, the light will be fine. They're not going to do any damage. They're not going to warp or pull. This is a very light support tip. And since we're using the snap to grid, this is going to be a lot less clustered than if I was just doing this freehand. And I'm allowing the system to kind of auto brace and parent for us. So this worked really well when I did it this way. I simply cradled that whole chunk, and then I let the rest of the print build itself. It didn't even support anything back here. I just let it rest right there and pulled all the way up to that. Now I did add a couple supports here along the blade itself as the sword was building, but not too many, only a few on each side to kind of reinforce the strength there. And then I went ahead and added braces. And that's it. That would be all it takes to print something like that. This is a pretty small, light part anyway when it came out. So honestly, this might have even been overkill, but it was a good print and the part came out perfect. So I was happy with that result. Of course, there are other ways you could print this part too. You could actually lay it down on its blade. You could point that down if you wanted to and start with the edge of the sword down here on like one of these angles. But I didn't really want to do that because that's the part you're going to see, whereas this is the part that sockets into the hand where they're holding the blade. So I felt like this was a better angle to work with, and it really created the least amount of suction putting it at an angle there. You only get maybe like 5-10 layers of suction in that little tiny cup that it creates, and you're perfectly fine. But that's the last part we have to look at for this particular episode of Supported It. Hope y'all enjoyed this particular episode and this type of content. We're going to try and do some more of these episodes. I have a part 2 planned, which will be coming out tomorrow, and you guys can check that out as well and see if you like this. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching. We really appreciate the support, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye.